Now, are we all set? Shall we begin? I think we'd better. Otherwise, we're going to be running late. Now, I want to begin this introduction by reminding you of what you have heard previously. You remember that Annetta Moran spoke to us yesterday, talking about a life promoting life. And Annetta Moran has been involved with the pro-life movement for some 35 years, and she was a former vice president of Voice for Life. And then we had Father Vaney talking to us a little bit later in the day about changing values and the devaluing of human life and human worth. So that theme that began with Annetta Moran and then continued with Father Vaney has a connection with the remarks that are going to be made by our next speaker, who is Josephine Reeves. Josephine is a barrister and solicitor. She is the president of Voice for Life. She's a mother of 6 children. She's been active on the board of a number of elected boards and groups, including the National Council of Women, the Taranaki Hospital and Area Health Boards, and Sacred Heart Girls College in New Plymouth. She is an avid devotee and promoter of the right to life and everything human that is so close to the heart of the Roman Catholic Church. Ladies and gentlemen, Josephine Reeves.
Thank you, Philip. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt lose its savour, wherewith shall it be salted? It is good for nothing any more, but to be cast out and to be trodden on by men. Matthew chapter 5, verse 13. We should be worried. We should be very worried. In our country, God's own, as ironically it has often been called, the Human Rights Commission claims to champion various human rights. However, the greatest human rights issue facing us today is the abuse of the right to life. The New Zealand Catholic bishops told us in a statement 16 years ago that the unborn child's right to life was the greatest human rights issue confronting New Zealand, and that is no less true today. This right to life is the most basic of all human rights, because without it, any other right becomes irrelevant. In other words, if we don't have the basic right to life, then no other right is going to matter to us. Why should we Christians, and more particularly Catholics, be worried? Because we have been called to be the salt of the earth, and we have been warned about the salt losing its savour. For the reasons I've just given you, I believe that in the realm of social justice, the deprivation of the most basic right to life ranks as the core and most extreme form of injustice. To begin, I'll give you a brief historical background of one salt container, if you like, the pro-life organisation Voice for Life, which I'm honoured to represent. Then I'll look at aspects of the current climate in society which must give good people cause for concern, a vision of hell, if you like. Then I'll cover some initiatives which give cause for hope. And finally, I'll give some suggestions as to how we can fulfil that call to be the salt with savour with regard to life issues. So first, a brief background. As many of you will know, Voice for Life began its life as a Society for the Protection of the Unborn Child in 1970. Our organisation has a great heritage of pro-life heroes. These people were truly the salt of the earth in their time. We have the late Dr. Pat Dunn, obstetrician and gynaecologist, and father of His Lordship Bishop Dunn. In the 6 years that followed the British Abortion Act of 1967, New Zealand public hospitals had reported a tenfold increase in abortions. Dr. Dunn joined with an Auckland colleague, the late Sir William Liley, in establishing our organisation to protect New Zealand's unborn children. Dr. Dunn could already see the disturbing trends, and he realised that New Zealand needed to prepare a resistance force for the day when the proponents of abortion would begin their major thrust. We have Sir William Liley, the first national president of our society, who became known in many parts of the world as the father of fetology. In 1963, he pioneered the procedure of carrying out a blood transfusion on the unborn child. This was the first time an unborn child had been successfully treated as a patient in medicine. I can clearly remember Sir William's first visit to New Plymouth, my hometown, in 1971. My second and third children, who were identical twin boys, were only a few months old. We have Dr. Diana Mason, who was our society's second national president. She worked extensively with single pregnant young women and, in fact, delivered many of their babies. Many of you will also know that she was the wife of the late Bruce Mason, famous New Zealand playwright. We have the late Mr. Des Dalgety, high-profile lawyer of international repute, who was our third national president. And recently, sadly, we lost another of our pro-life heroes, Dame Marilyn Pryor, fourth national president and tireless worker and unceasing advocate for the unborn. Within 5 years of its inception, the Society had a membership of more than 40,000 members in 56 branches. Last year, the Society rebranded as Voice for Life, which, while still retaining its focus on the unborn child, speaks on now other topical issues, these being women's health, families, euthanasia, and bioethics. In a secular world, Voice for Life is a secular organisation which has as its vision a nation which is safe for all its peoples from conception to natural death. Voice for Life's purpose is to educate and inform, to value and protect the gift of human life. While Voice for Life is a secular organisation, its vision and purpose is actually in accord with the biblical charge to be the salt of the earth. Indeed, because this is so, many of our members also have religious affiliations. I'll expand a bit later on Voice for Life being an effective secular organisation. But first, let's face the vision of hell that confronts us now. This has come about, I believe, because of several reasons. Among them, a feeling of helplessness in the face of what seems to have become a veritable tide of secularism. This secularism threatens to engulf and obliterate all that a society based on the Judeo-Christian ethic has held dear and essential for the working of a healthy society. Another cause is subtle brainwashing over the years by radical feminist groups and secular influences, and an acceptance by society of individual rights and choice as the overarching good. Then there is apathy, pure and simple. It's not my concern, not my business. Or alternatively, a fear of being vilified by the use of such words as fundamentalist, religious right, homophobe. We've all heard them. One of our society's national executive members a couple of years ago was actually called a zealot by the editor of one of New Zealand's major daily newspapers. There's now a great cloud overshadowing the family, which is the linchpin of society. As one of our colleagues in the pro-life cause, social commentator Bruce Logan says, current social policy is creating a culture which is killing the family. Some forms of family are better than others, and it is in the state's and society's best interests to protect the natural family unit. Liberal ideologies are being foisted onto the nation by those in power, often in the face of protest by the majority. Society's values are declining alarmingly, and there is a move to increasing secularism based on utilitarian ethics. These ethics are often based on the misuse of the word compassion, and as I've said, on promotion of the precedence of individual choice and rights. But as Bruce Logan asks, is choice really an absolute? Do we need the consequences of a belief in the absolute nature of choice? Do we need such high levels of divorce and family breakdown and the growing rate of fatherless children and the suffering that goes with all of these? Do we really need to have homosexual or serial polygamous marriages, or relationships, I should say, treated as the moral and legal equivalent of marriage? Do we need an increasing number of abortions, sexually transmitted diseases, and a burgeoning pornography industry, along with legal prostitution? Do any of these characteristics of our time actually represent an advance in civil society? Is New Zealand following a world trend, or has it deliberately chosen a culture of death? Just to illustrate some of the decisions and actions being undertaken on behalf of our country, which are cause for concern. In a commemoration of the 10th anniversary of the International Year of the Family on the 6th of December last year, the United Nations General Assembly adopted what Bruce Logan described as the most far-reaching and significant declaration on the family for 2 decades. This was the Doha Declaration of the Family, and it reaffirms international commitments to the family and calls upon all governments, international organisations and members of civil society to take action to protect the family. It stated, "The family is the natural and fundamental group unit of society and is entitled to the widest possible protection and assistance by society and the state." However, New Zealand, along with several other countries, disassociated itself from the decision. Apparently, a concerned New Zealand Member of Parliament couldn't get leave of Parliament to note with regret the dissent expressed by New Zealand's representative. Apparently, so far, with one exception, neither the declaration nor New Zealand's disassociation has been reported in our media. The fact that we're generally kept in ignorance of decisions being made in our name is a scandal. On February the 18th this year, New Zealand voted against the landmark United Nations resolution that condemned human cloning as incompatible with human dignity and the protection of human life. By a 71 to 35 vote, the United Nations Legal Committee asked the General Assembly to adopt a declaration calling on member states to prohibit all forms of human cloning. New Zealand was among the 35 votes against the resolution. Thus, we are faced with medical research which may violate the dignity of human life and exploit one human life for the benefit of another. There is the possibility of creating human life for research and other unethical purposes. The figures released in 2004 show that in the previous year, 18,510 unborn children were killed. Nearly 99% on the spurious grounds that continuation of the pregnancies would result in serious danger to the mental health of the mothers. Our country has recently seen the legalisation of prostitution, civil union legislation which denies marriage its once special place in our society, and legislation denying parents the right to know that their underage daughter has decided to kill her unborn child, their grandchild. Thus, we have 18,510 grieving mothers, many of whom will go on to develop physical and psychological damage as a result. Damage such as increased risk of subsequent premature birth, increased risk of breast cancer, particularly after abortion of a first pregnancy, increased risk of placenta previa and ectopic pregnancy, not to mention grave psychological problems, drug and alcohol abuse, and increased promiscuity. A figure of 80% has been put on the number of women suffering some complication as the result of abortion. In addition, we have 18,510 disenfranchised fathers and 4 times that number of grandparents with a gap in their lives. Now, attitudes towards abortion inform our attitudes towards euthanasia. There is a clear example with regard to the respective issues of abortion and euthanasia, which we must heed. In 1977, following the report of a Royal Commission, Parliament passed the Contraception, Sterilisation and Abortion Act to provide greater protection for unborn children. It was the only legislation passed anywhere in the Western world in the 1970s which had that objective, and people thought that the Abortion Supervisory Committee, provided for by the Act, would be a reliable watchdog. Alas, that committee has turned out to be little more than an apologist for the pro-abortion lobby. In 1984, for example, 7,425 unborn children were killed. As I have said, in 2003, 18,510, over 3 classrooms a school day, were killed. I truly believe that as well as the unborn child, there is another victim of abortion. That is the mother. In a society obsessed with choice and instant gratification, there are tremendous social pressures immediately surrounding an unhappily pregnant woman, urging her to get rid of it. It has been said that a woman wants an abortion as an animal in a trap wants to gnaw off its leg to free itself. Many women have said that if there had been just one other person supporting them to have their babies, they would not have gone down the abortion road. Sadly, our society paints abortion as the quick, easy fix and the end to all the woman's problems, when it is anything but that. In fact, for many, many women, abortion is the beginning of problems which in many cases can remain for life. The Catholic bishops have said that for all her passionate concern for the unborn, the attitude of the Church is at the same time one of understanding and compassion for the pregnant woman, and that the dignity of motherhood demands support and encouragement from everyone. Words are not enough, and we need to play our part in supporting those who, in the words of the bishops, offer professional and practical assistance, and all the human companionship and encouragement which a woman needs to help her have her baby. Now, abortion was originally to be just for the hard cases, much as the proponents of euthanasia now say that it would be just for the hard cases. The problem is, you can't legislate for just a little bit of killing. There is no reason to suppose that legalised euthanasia will be any different from the abortion experience. One has to look no further than Holland to see how out of control the killing of the aged and the infirm has become. An article in the British Medical Journal early this year contained the information that the Royal Dutch Medical Association recently recommended that doctors in Holland should be allowed to kill citizens who have no medical problems but who don't want to go on living. And I read recently that infant euthanasia in the Netherlands is more widespread than earlier believed. Apparently, no doctors involved in reported cases were prosecuted. It is a slippery slope indeed. Accordingly, we should be very worried that a current New Zealand MP, who has already successfully campaigned for legalisation of prostitution and for civil unions, has indicated on public radio that he wants to see voluntary euthanasia on the post-election social agenda. It is disturbing to note that while the first attempt to introduce euthanasia in 1995 was defeated by 61 to 29 votes, in 2003, a private member's Death with Dignity bill was rejected by 60 votes to 57, a margin of only 3. Death with dignity is a misnomer for that bill if ever there was one. It would be more accurate to call it the Deliberate Death Bill, because it purports to set out the rules for actively killing someone. So we find ourselves at a very interesting and important point in history. The feedback from our society's rebranding has been extremely positive and encouraging and has come from diverse quarters. There are many initiatives which give cause for hope. From our society have grown other organisations. Organisations such as Pregnancy Help and Pregnancy Counselling Services provide the practical help needed by many women. In 1975, the late Dame Marilyn Pryor prepared an extensive report on the welfare needs of solo parents, single pregnant girls and overburdened mothers. This report highlighted the need for an organisation concerned solely with meeting the needs of pregnant women. The 1975 conference of the Society for the Protection of the Unborn Child approved the establishment of a separate organisation to meet the welfare needs of women. And 3 months later, the first branch of Pregnancy Help was set up in Auckland. Since then, many thousands of women have been helped by the organisation. In 1983 alone, this group had more than 2,000 clients. Most of the volunteers became involved because of their pro-life convictions. They could not oppose abortion and then ignore the problems faced by women in the course of their pregnancies. In 1979, another colleague in the pro-life cause, Mrs. Nina Barry-Martin, established pregnancy counselling services with a view to helping women cope with their pregnancies. As well as with pregnant women, the organisation was soon dealing also with women experiencing post-abortion depression. The service was extended to include husbands, parents and others affected in some way by the abortion experience. There is Project Rachel, a church-based initiative to help women post-abortion. There is Abortion Concern, which supports women post-abortion and is described as abortion-experienced women defending the right to refuse. In 1975, the late Mrs. Connie Perdue helped found Feminists for Life, which sought a broad role for women in the community while opposing permissive abortion. It later became Women for Life and is now known as Family Education Network, or FEN, which does invaluable work educating young people in schools. 9 Months Plus, set up by our organisation's immediate past president, Mrs. Jenny Street, and based in Christchurch, is another pro-life initiative educating young people in the schools. These and other pro-life organisations are an example of the adage that you bloom where you are planted. Clearly, they are meeting a particular need in a particular pro-life way. Where Voice for Life is planted, and we hope will bloom, is in speaking up on pro-life issues in mainstream secular society. Our purpose, which is to educate and inform, brings us into direct contact with politicians and opinion formers. We know that even in this great age of communication, there is widespread ignorance of the impact of abortion, the cost to families, the danger to women, the risks to everyone in becoming old or infirm, and of course, the ethics surrounding biotechnology. These 5 areas of priority are all linked by one essential theme: the inviolability of human life. We have summarised our pro-life message in each of these areas on the back of our bookmarks. And I'm sorry, I was supposed to have a bookmark to hold up and show you, but you will find them on the Voice for Life stand later on. Please feel free to take one or more, as the case may be. We know that trying to engage people on abortion and respect for life is for many reasons a hard task. However, we also know that generally people are still developing their opinions and are looking for information and guidance on these related issues. Now let me expand on just one of these issues, informed consent, which we have identified as a women's health issue. A specific area where abortion counselling and pregnancy counselling differ is their approach to dealing with the unborn child. As was evident from evidence given to the Royal Commission in 1977, those committed to abortion counselling prefer to avoid mentioning the unborn child. This raises the concern of whether women are being in a position to give their fully informed consent, which is mandated by law in any medical or surgical procedure. It has become increasingly apparent to Voice for Life that in fact many women undergoing abortion have not been given sufficient information to constitute fully informed consent. The only time in nearly 20 years that abortion numbers actually dropped in New Zealand was in 1988. For 2 months that year, an informed consent booklet published by then Health Minister Bill English was available in doctors' surgeries around the country. When Bill English was no longer Health Minister, the Family Planning Association got the Department of Health to dump the booklet. As Marilyn Pryor said, they didn't want women having access to information of that kind. It has always seemed to me, if we could find a woman post-abortion who realised that she had not been given sufficient information to constitute informed consent, then there would be the possibility of a court action against the doctor. As things stand, doctors are effectively above the law because no one can challenge what is seen as a purely clinical decision of the doctor unless bad faith can be proved. Any legal challenge brought against an abortion doctor can be brought only by someone who has legal standing, and according to New Zealand case law, that person would have to be, at the least, one of the statutory participants in the abortion process. The doctor, as a statutory participant in the process, is certainly not going to bring a court action against himself. The killed unborn child has no one to speak for him or her, and the mother, at the time of the abortion at least, believed that that was the course of action that she must take. Therefore, if we could find a woman who had not been given full information before the procedure and was prepared accordingly to bring an action against the doctor subsequently, then other unscrupulous doctors would be put on notice that they are not as immune from prosecution as they might have thought. In fact, relatively recently, we did find such a young woman, but unfortunately too great a time had elapsed since the abortion, and an application for an extension of time was not granted by the court. This was a great disappointment. There are a number of reasons which prevent women who have had abortions from coming forward. However, one of my fervent hopes is that a brave young woman may indeed come forward so that we can help her mount a challenge against a corrupt system. So what can all of us here do today to fulfil the call to be the salt with savour? We're not to hide ourselves in some ghetto bewailing the sorry state of society today, but rather we're charged to be the salt of the earth, salt with savour. If we've lost the savour, the alternative is to be cast out and trodden on by men. My own Catholic upbringing is for me the source of great personal hope. I know that Jesus said that we are the light of the world, and he charged us to let our light shine before men. I'm reminded of the words of a vital young woman journalist who gave a key address at our last national conference. She said, "Those who have opted out of engaging in our culture might have done so with good motives, wanting to experience more of God's presence and to stay pure. Yet while becoming seemingly so privately engaged with God, they have become socially irrelevant. We must be seriously involved with society." So we're called to be the salt of the earth and the life of the world. How are we to obey that call with regard to our neighbour, the unborn, the aged, the infirm, pregnant women and families, who are all our neighbour? First and foremost, by the power of prayer. There is the amazing story of Dr. Bernard Nathanson. He was once the most prominent doctor in the United States, fighting to establish abortion on demand. From February 1971 until September 1972, he was the director of the largest and busiest abortion clinic in the world, with more than 70,000 abortions in his own medical career. Over the many years since that time, Dr. Nathanson has travelled his own spiritual journey and was received into the Catholic Church in 1996. I clearly recall Dr. Nathanson in a speech in Auckland 2.5 years ago, speaking of the pro-life battle, saying, but we have a secret weapon. Of course, he was speaking of prayer. As I've said, we're a secular organisation in a secular world, but I also know that nothing we could ever do would succeed without your prayers and with God's grace. And with prayer comes action. We can act by heeding the warning in the encyclical Humanae Vitae about the danger of power passing into the hands of public authorities who care little for the moral law. Nearly 30 years ago, the late Mr. Des Dalgety said in an address in Australia, "For the first 9 months of life, baby sanctuary is mother. Over the centuries, when that sanctuary was threatened, sanctuary became the physician. When New Zealand doctors failed our unborn children, there was the law. And when the law and the courts failed, the last line of defence became the politician." How do we heed Humanae Vitae's warning about public authorities who care little for the moral law, and how do we act on the adage that the last line of defence of the unborn is the politician? I think we need to ask ourselves some questions. How do the laws of our land reflect the laws that govern everyone, that is, with God's laws? We need to ask, to what degree do we endorse or reject those laws that are made by men? Unless they are supporting higher laws, shouldn't those laws, and indeed the makers of those laws, be rejected? How do we replace those who make evil laws with those who will uphold the higher law? Surely we Christians, who are the salt of God's earth, must act if we believe something is wrong. Martin Luther King said, "Those who passively accept evil are as much involved in it as those who perpetrate it. Those who accept evil without protesting against it are really cooperating with it." It is in our hands to heed Humanae Vitae's warning about public authorities who care little for the moral law and to treat the politician as the last line of defence in the battle for a culture of life. In their 1989 statement, the Catholic bishops wrote that they applauded those groups who were using their rights as citizens in a democracy to organise political support for the great cause of the right to life of the unborn child. They congratulated those parliamentarians who were determined to have enshrined in our laws full recognition and protection of that most fundamental human right, the right to life. Thus, we do have positive choices for action when we exercise the privilege of our democratic vote. Lest we feel sensitive about being single-issue voters, remember that when the young abolitionist movement initiated the first candidate survey on slavery, they were accused of being one issue. Remember also that without that most important and fundamental of all human rights, any other right becomes irrelevant. I urge you all to ask questions and to think carefully about how you are going to exercise your party vote this year. We all need to pray for discernment on this. I've told you about Voice for Life's heritage of towering, high-profile, pro-life heroes of the past. All these and others, like Dr. Gerard Wall, who gave up a particular political office for his pro-life beliefs, are heroes who have had a particular crown of thorns to wear. As I have described, we are now in a very different climate. Today we need to look to different places to recognise pro-life heroes standing up for life. For example, there are certain journalists whose openness to the truth regarding pro-life issues are career limiting. There are school teachers working in increasingly hostile environments who nevertheless strive to speak the truth. There are the parents, grandparents and families who support and love their children when unexpected pregnancies occur and who are there with love and support after an abortion. There are certain politicians, unfortunately all too rare, who stand for the truth, and this is reflected in the way in which they exercise their vote in conscience issues which have come before the House. I've mentioned the focus areas of Voice for Life. It is interesting to note that on the 21st of March this year, in the BBC News Bulletin, the top 3 news items were abortion, euthanasia, and stem cells. So the areas that our organisation has identified are up there in the secular news. This is encouraging because it means that our organisation is actually very mainstream in terms of the concerns that we have. The encyclical Humanae Vitae was prophetic. Even without the benefit of ultrasound technology, it taught that human life begins at conception and needs protection. Now science has caught up and also tells us that life begins at conception. However, science also wants to use early human life for other reasons. But human life is not just a commodity to be used at human whim. The end does not justify the means when it involves the taking of human life. Voice for Life is an organisation speaking for many mainstream concerns, and it needs the support of all those concerned about speaking up for a culture of life. You may feel that you're only one lone voice, but collectively we can be the salt of the earth and let our light shine before men. You will recall that in 1975 our society had 40,000 members and 56 branches. 30 years on, we have 42 branches, and these issues of life and death are no less compelling. There is a move afoot to liberalise the abortion law further. I cannot say strongly enough that we are at a watershed in the battle to transform our country into a culture of life and to reject the encroaching culture of death. For this battle, we need again a great groundswell of support. It's vital that politicians know of your opposition to the encroaching culture of death. We need to be proactive in finding the stance of those who aspire to public office, thus heeding the encyclical Humanae Vitae's warning about the danger of power passing into the hands of public authorities who care little for the moral law. I can best sum up the call to action to foster and uphold a culture of life in the adage, pray as if everything depends on God, and take action as if everything depends on you. It is very appropriate in this year designated by the Holy Father as the year of the Eucharist that we are at the Eucharistic Convention. And what a towering pro-life hero our Holy Father has been. In realising Voice for Life's vision of a nation which is safe for all its peoples from conception until natural death, offerings of the Holy Eucharist and prayer are our secret weapons against the wickedness and snares of Satan. In conclusion, there are 2 things everyone in this room can do today. Pick up 2 of our bookmarks from the Voice for Life stand. These bookmarks describe our main focus areas, and there are 2 different bookmarks available. Also join our mailing list so that you can be informed and understand the issues. The second thing is pray. In a few moments, we will have the opportunity to spend a holy hour with our Lord. This is a very potent weapon, and it sustains us. Pray the Rosary. Pray in your homes and in your churches. Pray for the protection of the great gift of human life. Thank you all.
You might remember that I asked those who are interested to pick up one of these. There are more on the way, incidentally. On the back of that is a prayer for the protection of the natural family, which will now be put up on the projector, and we will pray this together, and Josephine will lead it for us, please.
Is it up there?
Is it up there? Is it up on the projector? Right, whenever you...
Prayer for the protection of the natural family. O God, our Father, in your infinite goodness, you created the human race, male and female, in your own image and likeness, and established the natural human family as an icon of the perfections found within the Blessed Trinity. We beg you to protect and defend the institution of marriage and of the natural family, from every form of corruption so prevalent in our day and age. Lord Jesus Christ, you took flesh from the womb of the Blessed Virgin Mary, espoused to St. Joseph, and so sanctified family life and human work. Bless, protect, and defend the mutual love of spouses, that it may be fruitful, both in healthy offspring and good works. God, the Holy Spirit, you who are love itself and have made our bodies your holy temple, inspire a pure sacrificial love between spouses, so that they may love and cherish each other as they do their own bodies. Protect and defend all authentic human values within the natural family, that purified by Christ's love, we may be safely led through the changing things of this life to the everlasting joys of heaven. Amen. Thank you.